"Get out!" Ethan Caldwell's voice was ice. "And take those children with you." Grace Mitchell stood frozen, her twins clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Security guards flanked her on both sides. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered. "Please, I have nowhere to go." "Should have thought of that before you brought them into my house." He turned his back. "I never wanted children here. I made that clear." But what Grace didn't know, what no one knew, was that in exactly 47 minutes, this same man would be on his knees begging her to stay. This is that story. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and follow this story until the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The text message arrived at 5:47 in the morning, and Grace Mitchell knew before she even read it that her life was about to fall apart. She was already awake. She hadn't really slept in months. Not since Marcus died. Not since the funeral bills arrived. Not since she learned that grief doesn't pay rent and sympathy cards don't buy formula. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand, insistent, demanding. Grace reached for it with trembling fingers. "Sunny Days Daycare, emergency closure due to water damage. We apologize for any inconvenience. Reopening TBD." She read it 3 times, then a 4th time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something she could survive. Inconvenience. That word sat in her chest like a stone. Her shift at the Caldwell estate started in 2 hours. Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire who had fired his last housekeeper for leaving a fingerprint on a crystal glass. Ethan Caldwell, who hadn't smiled in public in 5 years. Ethan Caldwell, whose staff whispered about him like he was a ghost who haunted his own mansion. Grace turned her head toward the twin cribs pushed against the wall of her cramped bedroom. Liam and Noah slept peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, their faces soft with dreams they wouldn't remember. 18 months old, her entire world wrapped in 2 small bodies. She had $127.43 in her bank account. Rent was due in 6 days. The formula cans were almost empty. And now she had no childcare. Grace pressed her hand against her mouth to stop the sob that wanted to escape. She couldn't wake them. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. But there was nothing to figure out. She couldn't miss work. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She couldn't call in sick because she'd used her last sick day 2 weeks ago when Noah had a fever. There was only one option, and it was insane. She would bring the twins. She would hide them. She would work faster and cleaner than she ever had before. And she would pray that Ethan Caldwell stayed in Manhattan where he belonged. Grace got out of bed and started packing the diaper bag. The cab dropped her at the service entrance of the Caldwell estate at exactly 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes before her shift officially started. Grace had never been late. Not once in 3 months. She had learned quickly that punctuality wasn't just expected. Here it was survival. She pushed the double stroller through the gate, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The mansion loomed above her, all stone and silence windows that watched like eyes. 27 rooms spread across 4 acres of manicured perfection. She had cleaned every inch of it, dusted every surface, polished every piece of silver that no one ever used. And she had never not once brought anything personal into this house. Until today. The twins were quiet, thank God. Liam sucked on his pacifier with the concentration of a philosopher contemplating existence. Noah had fallen back asleep during the cab ride, his head tilted at an angle that would give him a stiff neck later. Grace moved fast. She knew this house better than she knew her own apartment. She knew which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, which hallways echoed. She knew the storage room near the east wing, the one filled with cleaning supplies and seasonal decorations, the one no one ever visited. That's where she would hide them. She pushed the stroller down the corridor, her sneakers silent on the marble, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her lips. The storage room door opened with a soft click. Grace arranged the blankets on the floor, set up the portable playpen she'd stuffed into the diaper bag, propped her phone against a detergent bottle with cartoons queued up on the lowest possible volume. "Mama has to work," she whispered, crouching beside her sons. "Just for a few hours. You have to be quiet. Okay? Can you be quiet for Mama?" Liam grabbed her finger, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Noah stirred, opened his eyes, and smiled at her like she was the sun. Grace kissed both of their foreheads, tasting salt, realizing she was crying. "I'll be back to check on you. Every 15 minutes. I promise." She stood up. She walked to the door. She looked back once, memorizing their faces just in case. Then she closed the door behind her and started her shift. For 2 hours, Grace believed she might actually get away with it. She moved through her tasks with mechanical precision. Dust the grand staircase. Polish the silver in the dining room. Vacuum the carpets in the sitting room, making sure the lines were perfectly straight the way Mr. Caldwell insisted. Every 15 minutes, she snuck back to check on the twins. Quiet, content, playing with the soft toys she'd packed, watching the cartoons on her phone, occasionally babbling to each other in the secret language only they understood. Grace started to breathe again. Maybe this would work. Maybe she would survive this day. Maybe tomorrow the daycare would reopen, and everything would go back to normal, whatever normal meant anymore. She was in the kitchen preparing to polish the chandelier in the formal dining room when she heard it. A giggle. Not from the storage room. From the living room. Grace's blood turned to ice. She ran. Not walked, not hurried. Ran, abandoning all pretense of calm, her feet slapping against the marble as she rounded the corner and saw the scene that would either end everything or begin something impossible. The twins had escaped. Somehow, impossibly, they had pushed open the door she was certain she had latched. They had crawled down the hallway, explored until they found the living room, and discovered the decorative bowls on the lowest shelf of an antique cabinet. Now they sat in the middle of the pristine white marble floor, surrounded by overturned silver bowls, banging them like drums, shrieking with laughter, having the time of their 18-month-old lives. And standing in the archway on the opposite side of the room, briefcase in hand, Italian leather shoes gleaming, was Ethan Caldwell. He was supposed to be in Manhattan. He was always in Manhattan. But here he was frozen mid-step, staring at the chaos in his living room with an expression Grace couldn't read. Their eyes met. Grace opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg. But before any words could form, Liam stopped banging his bowl. He looked up at the tall stranger in the expensive suit, and with the fearless curiosity that only toddlers possess, he dropped his makeshift drumstick and crawled directly toward him. Ethan didn't move. He stood completely still as this tiny human approached, reached his legs, grabbed the fabric of his pants, and pulled himself up to standing. The baby looked up at the billionaire. The billionaire looked down at the baby. And then Liam spoke. "Dada." The word echoed through the mansion like a bell. Grace stopped breathing. She waited for the explosion, for the firing, for the fury that would end her career and her only source of income, and any chance she had of keeping her children fed and sheltered. But Ethan Caldwell didn't yell. He laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a measured chuckle, but a real laugh, surprised and warm and utterly human, as if the sound had shocked him as much as it shocked Grace. And then slowly, carefully, as if approaching something sacred, he knelt down on the marble floor and let the baby grab his finger. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was intimate. Grace stood frozen in the archway, her mind racing through every possible outcome, none of them good, while her eyes stayed locked on the impossible scene before her. Ethan Caldwell, the man who had fired 3 housekeepers in the past year, the man whose staff called him the Ghost because he moved through his own house like he was haunting it, was sitting on the floor of his living room, letting 2 babies climb all over him. Noah had joined his brother, crawling over with the determination of a tiny explorer claiming new territory. He grabbed Ethan's tie and pulled, examining the silk with fascinated intensity. Ethan didn't push him away. He didn't even flinch. "Which one called me that?" he asked quietly, his eyes still on the boys. Grace's voice came out strangled. Liam, the one on your left. Ethan nodded slowly, as if this information was important, as if he was filing it away for later reference. Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry, Grace finally managed. The daycare closed without warning, and I didn't have anyone else to call, and I couldn't miss another shift because the rent is due, and my husband died 3 months ago, and I just needed just one day to figure something out. And I know this is completely unacceptable, and I understand if you want to fire me, I do, but please just let me finish today, so I can look for another job tomorrow, and... Stop. The word was quiet, but firm. Grace's mouth snapped shut. Ethan looked up at her, really looked, and his expression wasn't angry. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't name. Your husband died. Of all the things she'd said, that's what he focused on. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. How? Car accident. He was coming home from work. I was making dinner. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And you've been alone since then? With twins? Yes. Working here? Yes. He was silent for a long moment, absently letting Liam examine the buttons on his shirt, pulling them off one by one, with the methodical patience of a scientist. They're not a problem, Ethan said finally. Grace blinked. What? The children. They're not a problem. He said it slowly, like he was figuring out if he meant it even as the words left his mouth. Finish your shift. We'll figure out a solution. Grace's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't possible. This wasn't how Ethan Caldwell operated. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone knew the rules. No personal problems, no excuses, no exceptions. And yet here he was covered in babies telling her it wasn't a problem. I don't understand, she whispered. Ethan looked up at her again, and something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like memory. Neither do I, he admitted. But I'm not going to fire a widow with infant twins because she did what she had to do to survive. Grace felt her eyes fill with tears. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Thank you, she managed. Ethan nodded once curtly, already retreating behind whatever walls he'd briefly lowered. Get back to work, Mrs. Mitchell. I'll have Henderson arrange temporary childcare until your regular situation is resolved. He stood carefully detaching Noah's grip from his tie and walked toward his study without looking back. But Grace noticed something as he left. His shoulders, always rigid with tension, had softened slightly, and there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. That night, Grace sat in her apartment with the twins asleep in their cribs, replaying the day in her mind. She still had a job. She still had income. And Ethan Caldwell, the coldest man in Connecticut, had sat on the floor of his mansion and let her babies call him Dada. None of it made sense. But for the first time in 3 months, Grace felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The changes started small. So small that Grace almost didn't notice them at first. Ethan's schedule shifted. The man who used to leave before dawn and return after midnight began staying home. Meetings that had always happened in Manhattan were suddenly conducted via video call from his study. Dinners that used to be taken at expensive restaurants now happened in his own kitchen, delivered by catering services he'd never used before. The house felt different, warmer somehow, even though nothing about it had physically changed. Grace moved through her days with the twins now officially permitted to be there. Mr. Henderson, the estate manager, had arranged for a small playpen to be set up in whichever room she was cleaning. The staff had been informed. No one had objected, though several had raised eyebrows that nearly disappeared into their hairlines. And Ethan was present. Not intrusive, not hovering, just there. He would pass through the living room while Grace vacuumed, pausing to watch the twins play with blocks. He would appear in the kitchen during their snack time, pretending to look for something in the refrigerator while Liam and Noah ate their crackers. He would walk past the nursery playpen 3, 4, 5 times in an afternoon, always with some excuse, never acknowledging what he was actually doing. But Grace noticed. She noticed the way his footsteps slowed when he heard the babies laughing. She noticed the way his expression softened when Noah smiled at him. She noticed the way he lingered always just a moment too long before forcing himself to walk away. Something was happening to Ethan Caldwell. Something even he didn't seem to understand. It was a Thursday afternoon when the real shift happened. Grace was in the laundry room folding towels while the twins napped in their portable cribs nearby. She was humming without thinking an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing, the kind of melody that carried generations of comfort in its notes. She didn't hear him approach. "What song is that?" Grace spun around, startled, nearly dropping the towel in her hands. Ethan stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He wasn't in his usual suit. He wore khakis and a casual button-down sleeves rolled up to his elbows, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "Just something my grandmother used to sing," Grace said, recovering. "It helps me think." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes on her face in a way that made her suddenly aware of her messy bun and the baby food stain on her collar. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "You should keep singing." Then he walked away, leaving Grace staring after him, her heart doing something strange in her chest. That night the twins couldn't sleep. Teething. Both of them. At the same time. Because of course they were. Grace walked circles around the small kitchen of the servants' quarters, Noah against her shoulder, trying to soothe him, while Liam screamed in his crib in the next room. She was so tired she could barely see straight. 3 months of single parenting. 3 months of doing everything alone. 3 months of grief and bills and fear and exhaustion that had seeped into her bones until she couldn't remember what rested felt like. She was warming a bottle over the stove, swaying, automatically humming that same lullaby through cracked lips when she heard footsteps behind her. Grace turned. Ethan stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a faded Harvard t-shirt, his hair mussed from what she assumed was sleep she'd disturbed. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "I tried to keep them quiet. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He stepped into the kitchen. "I wasn't sleeping." He gestured toward the small table against the wall. "Do you mind if I sit?" Grace shook her head, too surprised to speak. He sat. And then they were there together in the middle of the night, in a kitchen that belonged to neither of them, while a baby cried and a bottle warmed and the world outside slept peacefully, unaware of this strange moment unfolding in a billionaire's mansion. "My mother used to sing to me," Ethan said after a long silence. "When I was sick, when I was scared. She had a voice like yours, actually. Warm. The kind that makes you feel like everything might be okay." Grace didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. "She died 5 years ago." Ethan's voice was flat, factual, but Grace heard the wound beneath it. "Cancer. It took her in 4 months. I was with her at the end, holding her hand, and the woman I was supposed to marry, the woman I thought would be there for me through everything, she never showed up." Grace lowered herself into the chair across from him, Noah finally settling against her chest as the warm bottle worked its magic. "What happened?" she asked softly. "She left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That night. While I was at the hospital watching my mother die, Victoria packed her bags and disappeared, left a note saying she couldn't be with someone who was broken, that my grief was too heavy for her to carry." Grace felt her heart crack. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, then really looked, and his eyes were full of something she recognized. The same hollow ache she saw in her own mirror every morning. The same loneliness she'd been carrying since the police officer knocked on her door and told her Marcus wasn't coming home. "I haven't let anyone in since then," he said quietly. "Not really. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't trust that anyone will stay." Grace thought about Marcus, about the life they'd planned, about the future that had been ripped away from her in a single phone call. "I understand," she said. "When Marcus died, I felt like part of me died with him, like I was just going through the motions doing what I had to do to keep the boys alive, but not really living myself." Ethan nodded slowly. "And now?" Grace looked down at Noah, who had finally fallen asleep, his tiny fist curled against her collarbone. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to live again. For them. Because they need me to be more than just surviving." The silence that followed was different. Deeper. Shared. They sat together until the first hint of dawn lightened the kitchen windows. Not touching. Not making promises. Just existing in the same space, two broken people who had somehow found each other in the wreckage. When Grace finally stood to take Noah back upstairs, Ethan spoke again. "Grace." She turned. "You're not alone anymore." He said it simply like it was a fact rather than a declaration. "I don't know what this is what's happening here, but I know that much. You're not alone." Grace felt her eyes fill with tears. "Neither are you," she whispered. And then she walked away, carrying her sleeping son, feeling something shift in her chest that had been frozen for far too long. The photograph was an accident. Grace was cleaning Ethan's study, a task she performed twice weekly, dusting surfaces and straightening books he never read. She'd done it dozens of times without incident. But today, her cloth snagged on the edge of the desk, revealing a drawer that hadn't been fully closed. A silver key jutted from the lock, as if someone had turned it halfway and forgotten to finish. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't look. But the drawer was already open, and before she could stop herself, her eyes found the photograph inside. It showed a younger Ethan, his face less guarded, his smile genuine and warm. He had his arm wrapped tightly around a blonde woman whose beauty was almost painful to look at, the kind of beauty that opened doors and broke hearts. On the back, in faded ink, "Victoria, my forever." Grace put the photograph back exactly as she'd found it. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. This was the woman who had abandoned him. This was the woman who had called his grief too heavy. This was the woman who had broken something inside him that still hadn't healed. And somehow, impossibly, Grace felt a surge of anger toward this stranger. How could anyone look at Ethan Caldwell, really look at him, and not see what Grace was beginning to see? The kindness beneath the coldness. The loneliness beneath the distance. The man desperately searching for something to believe in again. Victoria Sterling hadn't deserved him. Grace was certain of that now. Ethan found her in the kitchen later that afternoon. "You saw her," he said without preamble. Grace's heart stopped. "I didn't mean to." "I know." He moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her. "I left the drawer open. My fault." "She's beautiful," Grace said quietly. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yes, Victoria was always beautiful, and ambitious, and charming, and completely, utterly incapable of loving anyone more than herself. "Why did you stay with her?" The question came out before Grace could stop it. She immediately regretted it. But Ethan didn't seem offended. He considered the question seriously, his brow furrowed. "Because I thought that was what love was supposed to look like," he said finally. "The beautiful woman, the perfect couple, the life everyone envied. I didn't know that real love was supposed to feel like—" He trailed off. "Like what?" He looked at her, then really looked, and Grace felt her breath catch. "Like coming home," he said softly. "Like being seen. Like not having to perform, or prove, or protect yourself every single moment." Grace thought about Marcus, about the way he'd made her laugh, about the way he'd held her when she cried, about the way he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in any room. "That's what it's supposed to feel like," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to hers on the counter. "Is that what you had? With your husband?" Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I'm glad," Ethan said. "I'm glad you knew what that felt like, even if it was taken from you too soon. I'm glad someone loved you the way you deserve to be loved." Grace felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. "You deserve that too," she said. "You know that, right? You deserve to be loved by someone who stays." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I believe that." "Then believe me." The words hung between them heavier than they should have been, carrying more meaning than either of them was ready to acknowledge. Ethan reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I'm trying," he said. "For the first time in 5 years, I'm actually trying." Then he walked away, leaving Grace standing in the kitchen, with her heart pounding and her mind racing, and the unmistakable feeling that everything was about to change. The invitation arrived on a Friday, a dinner party at the Caldwell estate, investors, executives, society figures. The kind of event that required caterers and extra staff and Grace to work an extra 6 hours. She didn't mind. The overtime pay would help with the electricity bill. What she did mind was the name she saw on the guest list, Victoria Sterling. Grace stared at the name, her stomach turning. She thought about telling Ethan, warning him. But what would she say? That she'd seen the guest list she wasn't supposed to see. That she was worried about a woman she'd never met. She decided to say nothing. She would work the party. She would stay in the background. She would do her job and ignore the woman who had broken the heart of the man Grace was becoming increasingly terrified she was falling for. It was a solid plan. It lasted exactly 47 minutes. Victoria Sterling was even more beautiful in person. She swept into the mansion like she owned it all, silk and diamonds, and predatory confidence kissing cheeks, and laughing at jokes and commanding attention simply by existing. Grace watched from the kitchen holding a tray of appetizers, feeling suddenly small and shabby, and completely out of place. What was she doing here? What was she thinking? Imagining that there could ever be anything between her and Ethan Caldwell. She was a maid, a widow, a woman with nothing but 2 babies and a mountain of debt. And Victoria Sterling was the kind of woman billionaires married. Grace was about to retreat to the kitchen to spend the rest of the evening hiding from her own foolish hopes when Victoria appeared beside her. "So," Victoria said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness. "You're the one everyone's been whispering about." Grace turned, startled. "I'm sorry." "Ethan's charity project." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The poor widow with the adorable twins. It's very touching, really. He always did have a weakness for broken things." Grace felt her spine stiffen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Victoria stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming her presence, suffocating. "Let me make it simple for you. Ethan Caldwell is not for someone like you. He's having a moment of guilt or boredom or whatever it is that drives rich men to play savior. But he'll get over it. He'll remember who he is and who you're not. And when he does, you'll be back to scrubbing toilets, and I'll be back where I belong." "Which is where?" Grace asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Victoria's smile turned sharp. "By his side, where I've always been, where I always will be." She walked away before Grace could respond, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and threat hanging in the air. Grace found a quiet corner in the butler's pantry and tried to stop shaking. Victoria's words echoed in her head, finding every insecurity she'd tried to bury, pulling them to the surface where they could do maximum damage. She was right. Of course she was right. Grace was nobody. A maid who'd gotten lucky, who'd stumbled into a moment of connection with a man so far above her station that even imagining anything more was laughable. What had she been thinking? She was so lost in her own spiral that she didn't hear the door open, didn't notice she wasn't alone, until a hand closed around her arm, gentle but firm. She looked up. "Ethan." "What did she say to you?" His voice was quiet but intense, his eyes searching her face. "Nothing. I'm fine." "Don't lie to me, Grace. He stepped closer, his hand still on her arm. "I saw your face when you walked away from her." "What did she say?" Grace tried to pull away, but he held firm. "She said what's true," Grace whispered, hating the crack in her voice. "That I don't belong here. That you're just playing at something you don't mean. That eventually you'll remember who you are and who I'm not." Ethan's expression darkened. "That's what Victoria believes. It's not what's true, isn't it?" Grace finally met his eyes. "Look at her, Ethan. Look at her, and look at me. We're not even the same species." "You're right," Ethan said. "You're not." Grace felt her heart shatter. "She's a snake dressed in silk," Ethan continued. "A woman who abandoned me at the worst moment of my life because my pain was inconvenient for her. And you—" He paused, his grip on her arm, tightening slightly. "You walked into a house you were terrified of carrying children you'd hidden because you had no other choice, and you kept going. You kept singing. You kept loving your sons, like the world wasn't burning around you." Grace couldn't speak. "Victoria sees people as assets or obstacles," Ethan said softly. "You see them as human. That's why she'll never understand what's happening here. That's why she doesn't get to define you or us, or whatever this is becoming." "What is this becoming?" Grace whispered. Ethan's hand moved from her arm to her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her ache. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to stop finding out." And then, before Grace could respond, before she could list all the reasons this was impossible, before she could protect either of them from what was about to happen, he kissed her. Soft, brief, almost tentative, but undeniably, irrevocably real. When he pulled back, Grace was crying again. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said, wiping her tears with his thumb the way he had in the kitchen days ago. "I'm not her. I don't run from things that matter." "Promise me," Grace whispered. "Promise me you won't break my heart." Ethan's eyes held hers, steady and certain. "I promise I'll try not to. And if I fail, I promise I'll be there to help pick up the pieces." It wasn't a perfect promise. It wasn't the guarantee she wanted, but it was real. And for tonight, real was enough. Victoria watched them from across the room. She saw the kiss. She saw the tears. She saw everything she needed to see to confirm what she'd suspected. Ethan Caldwell had feelings for the maid. Real feelings. Not charity. Not guilt. Something that looked dangerously like love. Victoria smiled, but her eyes were cold. She hadn't come here to reconnect with old friends. She hadn't come to win Ethan back through charm or seduction. She had come to destroy whatever was growing between him and this nothing woman who had somehow captured his attention. And now she knew exactly how to do it. The pocket watch. Ethan's father's pocket watch. The one priceless item in this house that carried real emotional weight. If it went missing, someone would have to be blamed. And Victoria knew exactly who that someone would be. She picked up her champagne, took a slow sip, and began to plan. Victoria waited 3 days. 3 days of smiling at breakfast. 3 days of pretending she had accepted defeat. 3 days of watching Ethan look at Grace with something that made Victoria's blood boil. On the 4th morning, she made her move. The pocket watch sat in its display case in Ethan's study, exactly where it had been for 15 years. Silver. Antique. The last gift his father ever gave him before the heart attack took him without warning. Victoria knew what that watch meant to Ethan. She knew he checked on it every morning, touched the glass case like he was touching his father's hand one more time. She also knew that if it disappeared, someone would have to be blamed, and she knew exactly who that someone would be. At 7:23 a.m., while the house was still quiet, and Grace was feeding the twins in the servants' quarters, Victoria slipped into the study. Her hands were steady as she lifted the glass dome. Her heart didn't even flutter as she tucked the watch into her pocket. She walked calmly to the east wing, found the loose floorboard near the piano room that she'd discovered during one of her tours of the house, and dropped the watch through the gap. It landed with a soft thunk. Victoria smiled. Now all she had to do was wait. The first whisper started at lunch. "Did you hear Mr. Caldwell's pocket watch is missing?" Grace looked up from the sandwich she was eating in the kitchen, her stomach suddenly tight. "What pocket watch?" Mrs. Patterson, the head cook, lowered her voice. "His father's watch, the one he keeps in the study. It's gone. Mr. Henderson is beside himself." "Maybe it was moved for cleaning," Grace offered. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "No one touches that watch. No one. Mr. Caldwell checks it himself every morning." She paused, her eyes sliding to the playpen where Liam and Noah were napping. "Strange timing, isn't it? Things going missing right when there's new people in the house." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything." Mrs. Patterson picked up her tray. "But people talk. You know how it is." She walked away, leaving Grace sitting alone with a sandwich she could no longer eat and a fear she couldn't name. By 3:00 p.m., the whispers had become a chorus. Grace heard them everywhere she went, in the hallways, in the laundry room, in the kitchen where she'd once felt almost welcome. "She's always in the study cleaning. Those babies get into everything. Single mother all alone, probably desperate for money. I heard she was behind on rent before she got this job." Each word was a knife. Each glance was an accusation. Grace kept her head down and tried to focus on her work, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the dust cloth. She needed to find Ethan. She needed to tell him what was happening before someone else did. But Ethan was in Manhattan. A meeting he couldn't miss, Henderson had said. He wouldn't be back until evening. Grace had never felt more alone. At 4:47 p.m., she returned to her locker in the staff quarters to find it pried open. Her clothes were scattered across the floor. Her wallet had been emptied, the cash she'd been saving for groceries gone. And in the middle of the mess, torn at the corner, was the only photograph she had of Marcus. Grace sank to her knees. She picked up the photograph with trembling fingers, staring at her husband's face, at the smile she would never see again, at the life that had been stolen from her twice now. "Who did this?" she whispered to the empty room. No one answered. But she knew. Somehow, in her bones, she knew. Victoria. Grace stood up slowly, her grief hardening into something else. Something that felt like steel. She would not let this woman destroy her. She would not let her take away the one good thing that had started to grow in this house of silence and shadows. She would fight. But first, she had to find proof. Mr. Henderson found her before she could find anything. "Mrs. Mitchell." His voice was cold, formal. Nothing like the cautious respect he'd shown her in recent weeks. "I need you to come with me." Grace's heart stopped. "What's wrong?" "There are some questions about the missing item. The staff has raised concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Henderson wouldn't meet her eyes. "It would be better to discuss this in my office." Grace looked at the twins, still playing peacefully in their portable crib, unaware that their mother's world was crumbling around them. "Can I bring my children?" "That won't be necessary. Mrs. Patterson will watch them." Grace wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to grab her babies and run. But running would make her look guilty, and she had nothing to hide. She followed Henderson down the hallway, feeling the eyes of every staff member on her back. The interrogation lasted 47 minutes. Henderson asked where she had been that morning. Grace told him. He asked if she had been in the study. Grace said yes to dust like she did every week. He asked if she had touched the display case. "No," Grace said firmly. "I never touched that case. I know how much it means to Mr. Caldwell." Henderson's expression didn't change. "Several staff members have reported seeing your children near the study yesterday afternoon. They were in their playpen. They couldn't have reached anything. Children are resourceful, Mrs. Mitchell." Grace felt tears building behind her eyes. "I didn't take anything. My children didn't take anything. Someone is lying to you." Henderson sighed. "Given the circumstances, I think it would be best if you took some time away from the estate. Just until the investigation is complete. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. You're firing me. I'm asking you to take a temporary leave, with pay. That's the same thing, and you know it. Henderson finally looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that might have been sympathy. Ms. Sterling suggested that it would be better for everyone if you weren't here while we sort this out. Mr. Caldwell agreed before he left for Manhattan. Grace's blood turned to ice. Ethan agreed to this. Ms. Sterling spoke with him this morning. He felt it was the appropriate course of action. No, that wasn't possible. Ethan wouldn't do this. Ethan had promised. Ethan had said he wasn't going anywhere. But Ethan wasn't here. And Victoria was. I want to speak to him, Grace said, her voice cracking. Let me call him. I'm afraid that's not possible. Mr. Caldwell is in meetings all day. He asked not to be disturbed. This is a mistake. Someone set me up. I know who it was. Henderson stood up. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is difficult, but accusations without evidence will only make things worse for you. I suggest you pack your things and go home. We'll be in touch when the investigation is complete. Grace wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Henderson by his perfectly pressed lapels and shake him until he believed her. She wanted to march into Victoria's room and tear it apart until she found the watch she knew was hidden there. But she was a widow with 2 babies and no power in this world of money and manipulation. So she did the only thing she could do. She packed. The twins didn't understand why they were leaving. Liam kept asking for Etan in his garbled toddler speech, looking around the servants' quarters like he expected the tall man to appear at any moment. Noah clung to Grace's leg, sensing her distress, his little face crumpled with confusion. Grace moved mechanically, folding clothes she'd just washed, packing toys she'd just organized, trying not to think about the life she'd started to imagine in this house. She was almost finished when she found the photograph. Not the torn one of Marcus. Another one. One she didn't remember taking. It showed Ethan on the floor of the living room, Liam on his lap, Noah tugging at his tie. All 3 of them were laughing. The image was slightly blurry, captured on a phone by unsteady hands. On the back in handwriting she didn't recognize were 5 words. He's happier than I've seen. Grace stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she tucked it into her pocket next to the torn picture of Marcus and finished packing. She left a note on the kitchen counter. She didn't write much. There wasn't much to say. I didn't take it, but I understand why no one believes me. She pinned it under the strawberry magnet that Liam loved to pull off every morning. Then she picked up her bags, loaded her sons into their stroller, and walked out the service entrance. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen Victoria watching from the second-floor window, a glass of champagne in her hand, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan's meeting ended at 6:43 p.m. He checked his phone for the first time in hours and found 17 missed calls from Henderson, 3 text messages from Victoria, and nothing from Grace. That last part bothered him more than the rest combined. He called Henderson first. What's happening? Henderson's voice was careful, measured. Sir, there's been an incident. Your father's pocket watch has gone missing. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean missing? It disappeared sometime this morning. We've conducted a thorough search of the premises. And? Henderson hesitated. There were concerns raised about Mrs. Mitchell. Ethan's blood went cold. What kind of concerns? Several staff members reported seeing her near the study. Her children were observed in that area yesterday. Given her financial situation, some felt that she might have been tempted to stop. Ethan's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Where is Grace now? She's been asked to take temporary leave while we investigate. On whose authority? Ms. Sterling suggested it would be appropriate. She said she discussed it with you this morning. Ethan's mind raced back to the brief conversation he'd had with Victoria before leaving for Manhattan. She'd mentioned something about household matters, about handling a minor issue while he was away. He'd barely been listening. He'd been thinking about Grace, about the kiss, about what it might mean for both of them. "I didn't authorize anything," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "Where is Grace now?" "She left approximately 2 hours ago. She took the children." Ethan was already moving toward the elevator. "Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir. She left a note in the kitchen, but—" "Read it to me." Henderson cleared his throat. "I didn't take it, but I understand why no one believes me." The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside, his heart pounding. "I'm coming home. No one touches anything in my study. And find out where Victoria is. I need to speak with her immediately." "Yes, sir." Ethan ended the call and stood alone in the descending elevator, his reflection staring back at him from the polished doors. He had promised Grace he wouldn't run. He had promised he would be different. And while he was sitting in a boardroom arguing about market projections, someone had driven her out of his house and made her believe he had abandoned her. The elevator reached the parking garage. Ethan started running. Victoria was waiting for him when he arrived at the estate. She sat in the living room, the same room where Liam had first called him Dada, wearing a silk robe and an expression of practiced concern. "Ethan, thank God you're home. It's been such a difficult day." "Where is she?" Victoria blinked, all innocence. "Who?" "Don't play games with me, Victoria. Where is Grace?" "The maid." Victoria's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I know you'd grown fond of her, but these things happen. Staff members aren't always who they seem to be." Ethan stepped closer, his anger barely contained. "What did you do?" "Me, I didn't do anything. I simply suggested that perhaps it would be better for everyone if she weren't here during the investigation. You agreed, remember? I agreed to handle a household matter. I didn't agree to throw out a woman and her children based on rumors and lies." Victoria's mask slipped just for a moment. Her eyes hardened. Her smile tightened. "Rumors? Ethan, your father's watch is gone. She was the only new person with access to your study. She's a single mother drowning in debt. The math isn't complicated. Grace didn't take that watch." "How do you know?" "Because I know her." Victoria laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "You've known her for a few weeks. I've known you for 7 years, and I know that you're thinking with something other than your brain right now." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "Get out." "Excuse me?" "Get out of my house. Tonight. Pack your things and leave." Victoria stood slowly, her composure cracking. "You can't be serious. You're choosing a maid over me." "I'm choosing someone real over someone who abandoned me when I needed her most." Ethan's voice was steady, certain. "You left me, Victoria. You left me holding my mother's hand while she died, and you didn't even have the decency to say goodbye to my face. I explained that. I wasn't built for grief. I wasn't built for staying. I know. You made that very clear." Ethan walked to the door and opened it. "But Grace stays. Grace shows up. Grace doesn't run when things get hard." Victoria's face twisted with fury. "She's using you. Can't you see that she walked into your house with nothing and she's going to walk out with everything? She walked out with nothing. Because of you." Ethan's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Now it's your turn." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving with rage. Then she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. She stopped beside him close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent that used to make him feel something, and now only made him sick. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "When she breaks your heart, when she takes your money and disappears, when you're alone again and you realize what you threw away, remember this moment. Remember that I warned you." "Goodbye, Victoria." She walked out. Ethan closed the door behind her and leaned against it, his heart racing. He had done what he should have done 5 years ago. Now he had to fix what Victoria had broken. He had to find Grace. The address was in her employment file. Ethan drove himself, ignoring the protests of his security team, pushing his car through traffic that seemed designed to keep him from where he needed to be. Grace's apartment building was exactly what he'd expected. Old brick, rusting railings. The kind of place where people lived because they had no other options, not because they wanted to. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, found her door, and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. "Grace, it's Ethan. Please, I need to talk to you." Silence, then finally footsteps. The door opened a crack, still chained, and Grace's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes were red, her cheeks were streaked with dried tears. She looked at him like he was a stranger. "What are you doing here?" "I came to bring you home." Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Home, your staff thinks I'm a thief. Your ex-girlfriend told everyone I was stealing from you, and you weren't there. You weren't there to stop any of it. I know, I'm sorry. I didn't know what she was planning. You promised." Grace's voice cracked. "You promised you wouldn't break my heart. I didn't mean for this to happen. But it did happen." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I stood in your house and they looked at me like I was dirt. Like I was nothing. And the worst part wasn't the accusation. The worst part was that for one horrible moment I thought you believed them. I thought you had agreed to send me away." Ethan's chest ached. "I would never. How was I supposed to know that?" Grace's voice rose. "You were gone. You're always gone. And I was alone again, being told that I don't belong again, being thrown out like I'm disposable again." "You're not disposable. You're not nothing. You're—" Ethan stopped, struggling for words that felt too big for his mouth. "You're the first real thing I've felt in 5 years." Grace stared at him through the gap in the door. "Then prove it," she whispered. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the pocket watch. Grace's eyes widened. "Where did you find it?" "Under the floorboards near the piano room. There's a loose panel. Liam probably dropped it through the gap while he was playing." "Liam found it. He must have. The watch had applesauce on it." Ethan almost smiled. "Your son has sticky fingers." Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, I didn't know. I never saw him with it." "Of course you didn't. You were working. You were doing your job. You were being the incredible mother you are." Ethan stepped closer to the door. "Victoria knew about the loose floorboard. She's the one who planted the seeds of doubt. She's the one who turned everyone against you while I was too far away to stop it. Victoria, she's gone. I told her to leave tonight." Grace's breath caught. "You did. I should have done it years ago. I should have done a lot of things years ago." Ethan pressed his palm against the door. "Grace, I can't change what happened today. I can't erase the hurt or the humiliation. But I can promise you this. I will never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong again. I will never let anyone drive you away. And I will never ever put anything or anyone above you and those boys." Grace was crying now, silently, tears streaming down her face. "How do I know you mean it?" she whispered. Ethan's answer was simple. "Because I'm here, and I'm not leaving until you let me in." The silence stretched between them. Then slowly Grace reached up and unlatched the chain. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside. He found Noah first, the baby feverish and restless, whimpering in his sleep. Without asking, Ethan picked him up, cradling the small body against his chest, murmuring the same nonsense sounds he'd heard Grace use to soothe him. Grace watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "You're good with them," she said quietly. "I'm learning." Ethan kissed Noah's forehead. "They're patient teachers." Liam woke up, then saw Ethan, and his whole face lit up. "Ethan!" He scrambled out of his crib and toddled toward them, arms outstretched. Ethan knelt down, one baby against his chest, the other crashing into his free arm. "Hey buddy, I missed you." Liam looked up at him with complete trust. Complete love. "Da-da." The word hit Ethan like it always did, like a gift he didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. He looked at Grace, his eyes wet. "Come home," he said. "Please. Both of you. All of you." Grace walked toward him slowly. She knelt down beside them on the threadbare carpet of her tiny apartment. She reached out and touched his face. "No more running," she said. "From either of us." "No more running," Ethan agreed. And there, surrounded by crying babies and scattered toys and the chaos of a life rebuilt from nothing, they found something neither of them had expected. They found home. But what neither of them knew was that Victoria Sterling wasn't finished. She had left the estate as ordered, but she hadn't left the state. And as she sat in her hotel room staring at her phone, she was already planning her next move. If she couldn't have Ethan Caldwell, no one would. Especially not some nobody maid who had somehow stolen what should have been hers. Victoria opened her contacts and found a name she hadn't used in years. A journalist, the kind who built careers on destroying people. She typed 3 words. "I have a story." Then she pressed send and waited for the war to begin. The article dropped at 6:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Grace was feeding the twins their breakfast when Ethan's phone started buzzing, not once, not twice, continuously, like an alarm that wouldn't stop. She looked up and saw his face change, the color drained from his cheeks. His jaw tightened until she could see the muscles working beneath his skin. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer, he just turned the phone toward her. The headline hit her like a punch to the chest. Billionaire's secret tech mogul, Ethan Caldwell, falls for his maid, while ex-fiancé reveals shocking truth about his unstable behavior. Grace's spoon clattered against the table. "What is this, Victoria?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "She went to the press." Grace grabbed the phone and scrolled down, her hands trembling. The article was worse than the headline. So much worse. It painted Ethan as an emotionally unstable recluse who had fired dozens of employees over minor infractions. It called Grace a gold digger who had, strategically, brought her children into his home to manipulate his loneliness. It quoted sources close to the family, claiming that Ethan had become obsessed with Grace, that he had kicked out his longtime fiancée in a fit of irrational jealousy. And at the bottom, in devastating detail, was the story of the missing pocket watch. Caldwell's new girlfriend was recently accused of stealing a priceless family heirloom, the article read. While charges were not filed, multiple staff members confirmed that she was asked to leave the premises during an investigation. She returned days later, apparently having convinced the billionaire of her innocence through means that remain unclear. Grace felt sick. "They make it sound like I seduced you to avoid prosecution. It's lies, all of it." "That doesn't matter." Grace pushed the phone back toward him. "People believe what they read. Your investors, your board, your business partners. They're all seeing this right now." As if to prove her point, Ethan's phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. He looked at the screen. 17 missed calls. Board members, lawyers, my PR team. "You need to deal with this. I need to deal with you first." "Ethan, no." He stood up and moved toward her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me. I don't care what they write. I don't care what anyone thinks. The only thing that matters is whether you believe in us." Grace looked into his eyes. She saw fear there, yes. But she also saw something else. Something that looked like certainty. "I believe in us," she said quietly. "But I'm scared." "So am I." Ethan pressed his forehead against hers. "But we're going to get through this, together." Liam chose that moment to throw a handful of oatmeal at the wall. Despite everything, Grace laughed. "Together. she agreed. By 9:00 a.m. the story had gone viral. Grace's face was everywhere. Screenshots from the article photos someone had taken of her, pushing the twins' stroller through the estate gates. Even a picture from her wedding day that someone had dug up from social media. Her phone rang constantly. Numbers she didn't recognize. Her old friends from college. Her mother-in-law, Marcus's mother, demanding to know if the stories were true. Grace let them all go to voicemail. She couldn't face them. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to explain something she barely understood herself. Ethan was in his study on the phone with his crisis management team, his voice sharp and controlled. She could hear fragments through the closed door. "I don't care about the stock price. I care about protecting her." "That's not an option. She's not going anywhere." "Then find another solution." Grace sat on the floor of the nursery with the twins building block towers and knocking them down, pretending that her world wasn't collapsing around her. At 10:23 a.m., her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. Her landlord. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm calling about your apartment." Grace's blood ran cold. "What about it?" "There have been some inquiries, reporters. They've been bothering other tenants asking questions about you." The landlord's voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to vacate by the end of the month. It's nothing personal, but I can't have this kind of attention on my building." Grace closed her eyes. "I understand. I'm sorry. You've been a good tenant. Thank you." She hung up and stared at the phone in her hand. No job, no home, no reputation. Victoria had taken everything. Ethan found her 20 minutes later still sitting on the nursery floor, tears streaming silently down her face. "What happened?" Grace told him. His response was immediate. "Move in with me." "What?" "Move in. Permanently. You and the boys." He knelt beside her, his hands finding hers. "I know it's fast. I know we haven't talked about it. But Grace, you belong here. This is your home. It has been since the moment you walked through that door." "Ethan, I can't just—" "Why not?" "Because people will say I'm exactly what they think I am. A gold digger. A woman who traded her dignity for a roof over her head." "People will say whatever they want to say. They always do." Ethan's voice softened. "But I know who you are. Your sons know who you are. And if anyone in this house has done any trading, it's me. I traded loneliness for love. I traded silence for laughter. I traded a life that meant nothing for a life that means everything." Grace stared at him. Her vision blurred with tears. "You love me." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't realized what he'd said. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes, I love you. I probably have since you hid your children in my storage room and sang lullabies while you folded towels." Grace laughed through her tears. "That's a terrible love story." "It's our love story." Ethan touched her face. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything." At 2:47 p.m., Victoria called. Ethan answered on speakerphone, his jaw tight. Grace standing beside him. "I see you got my present." Victoria said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Did you like the headline? I thought it really captured the essence of your little fairy tale." "What do you want, Victoria?" "What I've always wanted. You." "That's not going to happen." "No," Victoria laughed. "Let me tell you what is going to happen, Ethan. Tomorrow morning, I'm releasing the second part of the story. The part where I talk about your mother's death, about how you fell apart afterward, about the therapist you saw for 6 months because you couldn't stop having panic attacks." Ethan's face went white. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything, darling. I've always known everything. I just never had a reason to use it before." Grace grabbed Ethan's arm, steadying him. "You're blackmailing him," she said, her voice cold with fury. "I prefer to call it negotiation." Victoria's tone sharpened. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to release a statement saying that our relationship ended amicably and that I have your full support. You're going to fire your little maid and send her back to whatever hole she crawled out of." And you're going to publicly apologize for the misunderstanding about the pocket watch. And if I don't, then everyone will know that the great Ethan Caldwell spent 6 months crying in a therapist's office because his mommy died." Victoria paused. "Your board will love that. Your investors will love it even more." Ethan's hands were shaking. Grace could feel it through his arm. "You would destroy me," he said quietly, "just to win." "I'm not trying to destroy you, Ethan. I'm trying to save you from yourself." Victoria's voice turned soft, almost tender. "You don't belong with her. You belong with someone who understands your world. Someone who can protect you from it. You had that once. You can have it again." Ethan closed his eyes. Grace watched him, her heart breaking. She knew what he was thinking. She knew the calculation running through his mind. His reputation. His company. Everything he had built. All of it weighed against her. "Ethan," she whispered, "if you need to do this." "No." His eyes snapped open. "I don't need to do anything except tell you the truth, Victoria. Which is, I did see a therapist after my mother died. I did have panic attacks. I was broken and scared and more alone than I'd ever been in my life." His voice steadied. "But you know what? That's not weakness. That's being human. And if you think releasing that information will hurt me, you're wrong. It'll hurt you. Because everyone will see exactly what kind of person abandons someone at their lowest point and then tries to use their pain against them." Victoria was silent. "Run your story," Ethan continued. "Tell the world whatever you want. But understand this, you will never have power over me again. And you will never ever separate me from the woman I love." He hung up. Grace stared at him. "Ethan, I meant every word." He pulled her into his arms. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The second article dropped at 8:00 a.m. the next morning. Everything Victoria had threatened was there. The therapy, the panic attacks, the breakdown after his mother's death. But something unexpected happened. By noon, the narrative had shifted. People weren't mocking Ethan. They were defending him. This man lost his mother and sought help for his grief. That's not weakness, that's strength. Victoria Sterling sounds like a monster who leaks someone's mental health history. I have so much more respect for Ethan Caldwell after reading this. He's human. The comments section of every article was flooded with support. People sharing their own stories of loss and therapy. People calling out Victoria for her cruelty. People demanding to know why anyone would try to destroy someone for processing grief. Grace read the responses with tears in her eyes. "They're on your side," she said. "Ethan, they're actually on your side." Ethan looked stunned. "I didn't expect that." "You told the truth. You showed them who you really are." Grace touched his face. "That's what people respond to, not perfection. Authenticity." At 3:15 p.m., Victoria's name started trending on social media, but not in the way she had hoped. Investigative journalists smelling blood in the water had started digging into her past. Former friends came forward with stories of manipulation. Ex-boyfriends revealed patterns of controlling behavior. A former business partner accused her of sabotaging his company when he rejected her advances. The woman who had tried to destroy Ethan was being destroyed herself. By 6:00 p.m., Victoria Sterling had deleted all her social media accounts and disappeared from public view. But the damage she had done wasn't easily erased. Ethan's relationship with Grace was now public knowledge. Every time they left the house, cameras followed. Every time the twins were visible, speculation exploded online. Grace found herself analyzing every outfit, every expression, every word she said within earshot of a reporter. "I can't live like this," she admitted one night, lying beside Ethan in the darkness of his bedroom. "I'm not built for public scrutiny." "Neither am I," he said quietly. "But we don't have a choice." "We could. You could issue a statement saying it's over. Send me away. Let the story die. Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. Is that what you want? No. Grace's voice cracked. But I don't want to ruin your life either. You're not ruining my life. You're saving it. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Before you came, I was existing, going through motions, checking boxes. I had money and success and absolutely nothing that mattered. Ethan, you gave me a reason to come home. You gave me a reason to stay. His voice dropped. Don't ask me to give that up. I can't. I won't. Grace reached up and touched his face. Okay, she whispered. We stay. We fight. Together. Together. But neither of them knew that the biggest fight was still coming. At 7:23 the next morning, Ethan's lawyer called. We have a problem, he said without preamble. What kind of problem? Victoria filed a civil suit this morning. She's claiming emotional distress and defamation. She wants $10 million and a public apology. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. She went to the press, destroyed my reputation, leaked my medical history, and she's suing me for defamation. She's claiming that your public rejection of her caused her to be harassed online, that your staff defamed her by suggesting she planted the pocket watch. That's insane. That's litigation. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to cost time and money and energy. The lawyer paused. There's something else. What? She's also filed for an emergency hearing regarding the children. Ethan's blood turned to ice. What children? Mrs. Mitchell's twins. Victoria is claiming that they're being kept in an unsuitable environment, that their mother is in a relationship with an emotionally unstable man. She's asking for a welfare investigation. Grace had been listening from the doorway. Her face went pale. She can't do that, she whispered. She has no right. She has enough money to file whatever paperwork she wants, the lawyer said, and enough connections to make sure it gets fast-tracked. You'll have Child Protective Services at your door within 48 hours. Grace sank against the door frame. Not her children. She could handle the articles. She could handle the cameras. She could even handle losing her apartment and her reputation. But not her children. Never her children. Ethan moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her. We're going to fight this. How? Grace's voice was hollow. She has money. She has lawyers. She has connections. What do we have? Each other. Ethan's voice was fierce. And the truth. And 2 little boys who are healthy, happy, and loved. No investigation is going to find otherwise. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I've seen you with them. I've watched you sacrifice everything for them. I've held them while they slept and seen the way they light up when you walk into a room. He cupped her face in his hands. You are an incredible mother, Grace. And no one, not Victoria, not CPS, not anyone is going to tell you otherwise. Grace wanted to believe him, but fear had wrapped itself around her heart, and it wouldn't let go. The CPS investigator arrived at 9:00 a.m. on Thursday. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Professional, neutral, impossible to read. Grace invited her in with trembling hands. The investigation lasted 3 hours. Margaret examined the nursery. She interviewed Grace about her daily routine. She asked about the twins' feeding schedule, their sleep patterns, their developmental milestones. She asked about Ethan. How long have you been in a relationship with Mr. Caldwell? A few weeks officially, but we've known each other for almost 3 months. And he's involved in the children's care? Yes. He's wonderful with them. They adore him. Margaret made a note. The complaint suggests that Mr. Caldwell has a history of emotional instability. What? Grace's jaw tightened. Mr. Caldwell sought therapy after his mother's death 5 years ago. That's not instability. That's grief. The complaint also suggests that you initially concealed the children's presence in his home. I hid them in a storage room because my daycare closed without warning, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. Grace's voice strengthened. Is that evidence of bad parenting or evidence of a mother doing whatever it takes to keep her family fed? Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, something like respect flickered in her eyes. I'll need to speak with the children's pediatrician, and I'll need references from people who can speak to your parenting. You'll have them by end of day. Margaret stood. I'll be in touch with my findings. She left without another word. Grace collapsed onto the couch, her entire body shaking. Ethan sat beside her and held her until the shaking stopped. You did amazing, he said. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't let it show. He kissed her forehead. We're going to be okay. Grace wanted to believe him, but the waiting was its own kind of torture. The call came 4 days later. Grace was in the kitchen making lunch for the twins when her phone rang. She saw Margaret Chen's number, and her heart stopped. Hello? Mrs. Mitchell, I've completed my investigation. Grace gripped the counter to keep from falling. And I found no evidence of neglect or abuse. The children are clearly well cared for, developmentally appropriate, and bonded with both their mother and Mr. Caldwell. Margaret paused. I'm closing the case. No further action will be taken. Grace burst into tears. Thank you, she managed. Thank you so much. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen real neglect, real abuse. What I saw in your home was love. Imperfect, complicated, unconventional love, but love nonetheless. Margaret's voice softened. Take care of those boys. And take care of yourself. She hung up. Grace stood alone in the kitchen, sobbing with relief. The boys watched her with confused expressions, not understanding why their mother was crying, but sensing that something important had happened. Liam toddled over and wrapped his arms around her legs. Mama sad? Grace laughed through her tears and scooped him up. No, baby. Mama's happy. Mama's so happy. When Ethan came home that evening, Grace met him at the door. She didn't say anything. She just threw her arms around his neck and held on like she would never let go. He held her back just as tightly. We won, she whispered into his shoulder. We won, he agreed. But they both knew it wasn't really winning. It was surviving, and sometimes surviving was enough. That night, after the twins were asleep, Ethan found Grace in the nursery, watching them breathe. I've been thinking, he said quietly. About what? About what comes next. He moved to stand beside her. Victoria's lawsuit will take months, maybe years to resolve. The media attention will fade eventually, but it won't disappear completely. We'll always be the billionaire and the maid. We'll always be a story. Grace nodded slowly. I know. I want to change the story. Ethan turned to face her. I want to build something, not just for us, for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. What do you mean? Ethan pulled a folded paper from his pocket. A blueprint. A childcare center. Right here on the estate. For any employee who needs it. A place where parents never have to choose between their children and their jobs. Grace stared at the blueprint, her eyes filling with tears. You want to build a daycare. I want to build what you needed that first day. What you would have had if the world was fair. Ethan's voice was soft but certain. I can't change what happened to you, but I can make sure it never happens to anyone else. Grace looked at him, this man who had started as her employer and become her partner, her protector, her home. I love you, she said. It was the first time she had said it out loud. Ethan's face broke into a smile. I love you too. He pulled her close. Now, let's build something beautiful. Construction began 3 weeks later. Grace stood at the edge of what would become the nursery wing, watching workers pour the foundation, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, tangible, buildable hope. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking? That 6 months ago, I was hiding my children in a storage room and praying I wouldn't get fired. Grace leaned back against him. And now we're building a place where no parent will ever have to do that again. Life is strange. Life is miraculous. She turned in his arms to face him. You're miraculous. I'm just a man who got lucky. Ethan kissed her forehead. Lucky that you walked into my house. Lucky that your son called me Dada. Lucky that you didn't run when everything fell apart. I thought about running. I know. I'm glad you didn't. The moment was interrupted by a shriek from across the yard. Liam had discovered a mud puddle and was currently splashing in it with the abandon of a child who had never heard of laundry. Grace sighed. That's the third outfit today. Let him play. Ethan grinned. Mud washes off. Childhood doesn't. Grace looked at him, at this man who had transformed from a cold stranger into someone who understood that mud puddles were more important than clean clothes. Who are you? She asked softly. And what did you do with the billionaire who fired people for crooked silverware? Ethan's smile faded slightly. He's still here, underneath, but he's learning that there are more important things than perfection. Like what? Like love, like family. He paused. Like being the kind of man my father would have been proud of. Grace reached up and touched his face. He would have been proud, Ethan. I know he would. At 4:17 p.m. that same day, Ethan's lawyer called with an update on Victoria's lawsuit. She's dropped it, he said without preamble. Ethan nearly dropped his phone. What? All charges. The civil suit, the defamation claim, everything. Her lawyer called this morning. She wants to settle quietly and move on. Why? The lawyer hesitated. Apparently there's been some additional publicity she wasn't expecting. Several more former associates have come forward. There's talk of criminal charges related to some of her past business dealings. Her legal team advised her to cut her losses while she still could. Ethan sat down heavily on the nearest chair. So it's over? The lawsuit is over. Whether she'll try something else in the future, I can't say. But for now, yes. It's over. Ethan found Grace in the nursery, rocking Noah to sleep after his afternoon bottle. Victoria dropped the lawsuit, he said quietly. Grace's eyes widened. All of it. All of it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just closed her eyes and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. We're free, she whispered. We're free. But freedom, they would learn, came with its own complications. The first complication arrived at 9:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning in the form of Ethan's younger sister. Caroline Caldwell hadn't spoken to her brother in 4 years. She had sided with Victoria during the breakup, convinced that her brother was the one at fault for the failed engagement. She had skipped family holidays and ignored his calls and pretended he didn't exist. Now she was standing in his foyer, looking at Grace with barely concealed hostility. So, this is her, Caroline said, her voice dripping with disdain. The maid who seduced my brother. Grace felt her spine stiffen. I didn't seduce anyone. Right. You just happened to bring your children into his house and magically make him fall in love with you. How convenient. Caroline. Ethan's voice was sharp. Why are you here? His sister turned to face him, and for a moment something vulnerable flickered in her eyes before she covered it with ice. I saw the articles. About therapy. About Mom. Her voice cracked slightly. You never told me you were struggling. You never told me you needed help. Would you have listened? The question hung between them, heavy with years of silence and misunderstanding. Caroline's composure cracked. Maybe not then, but I'm listening now. Grace watched the siblings stare at each other, both wounded, both wanting connection, but not knowing how to bridge the gap. I'll give you two some privacy, she said quietly, moving toward the door. No. Ethan's hand caught her arm. Stay. If Caroline wants to be part of my life, she needs to accept that you're part of it too. Caroline's jaw tightened. Ethan, this isn't negotiable. Grace is my partner. Her children are my family. If you can't accept that, there's the door." The silence stretched painfully. Then Caroline did something Grace didn't expect. She turned to her, really looked at her, and said, "I'm sorry." Grace blinked. "What?" "I said terrible things. To the press. To mutual friends. About you." Caroline's voice was quiet but steady. "Victoria told me stories. Made you sound like a villain. I believed her because it was easier than admitting my brother might have been right all along." "Right about what?" "About deserving better than her. About deserving someone real." Caroline's eyes were wet now. "I spent 4 years defending a woman who turned out to be a monster, and I lost my brother in the process." Ethan hadn't moved. His face was unreadable. "You hurt her," he said finally. "You hurt Grace. You contributed to the narrative that almost destroyed us. I know. Saying sorry doesn't fix that." "I know." Caroline wiped her eyes. "But it's a start, and I'm asking for a chance to do better." Grace looked at Ethan, at the conflict written across his features. "Give her the chance," she said softly. "Grace. She's your sister. She's the only family you have left." Grace touched his arm. "I know what it's like to lose family. I know how much it costs. If there's any possibility of healing this, you have to try." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his sister. "One chance," he said. "That's all you get." Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's all I need." The reconciliation wasn't instant. It happened in small moments over the following weeks. Caroline showing up with coffee and an awkward apology. Caroline asking to see pictures of the twins. Caroline sitting through dinner without making a single snide comment about Grace's background. At 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, Grace found Caroline in the nursery watching Liam and Noah play with blocks. "They're beautiful," Caroline said without turning around. "Thank you." "My brother loves them. I've never seen him like this." Caroline finally faced her. "He used to be so closed off, so controlled. Now he's on the floor building block towers and making animal sounds." Grace smiled. "They have that effect on people. You have that effect on him." Caroline's voice was soft. "I was wrong about you, about everything. I thought you were after his money, his status. But you're not, are you? I don't care about his money. I know. I see the way you look at him, the way he looks at you." Caroline paused. Victoria never looked at him like that. Like he was enough exactly as he was. He is enough. He is now. Because of you. They stood in silence watching the boys play. Then Caroline said something that changed everything. "There's something you should know. About Victoria." Grace's stomach tightened. "What?" "She's not gone. She's regrouping." Caroline's voice dropped. "I still have friends in her circle. They say she's planning something bigger than the lawsuit." "What kind of something?" "I don't know. But she's been making calls, meeting with people, spending money on investigators." Caroline turned to face Grace fully. "She's not going to stop. Not until she destroys what you've built." Grace felt the fear creep back in the familiar cold that had lived in her chest during the worst of the media storm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I chose the wrong side once. I won't make that mistake again." Caroline reached out and squeezed her hand. "Whatever she's planning, you need to be ready." Grace nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Just protect my brother. Protect those boys." Caroline's eyes were fierce. "Protect what matters." Grace didn't tell Ethan about the warning immediately. She needed time to think. Time to figure out what Victoria could possibly be planning that would be worse than what she'd already done. At 11:43 p.m. that night, lying awake while Ethan slept beside her, Grace's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. but something made her pick up. "Hello? Mrs. Mitchell." The voice was male, unfamiliar. "My name is Daniel Harrison. I'm a private investigator." Grace's blood ran cold. "Are you working for Victoria Sterling?" "I was." A pause. "But I'm not anymore." "What do you want?" "To warn you. Victoria hired me to dig up information on your late husband." "On Marcus Mitchell." Grace sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "Why?" "Because she found something. Something about how he died." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't know how to tell you this." "Tell me what—" "Your husband's accident. It wasn't an accident." The words didn't make sense. Grace heard them, processed them, but they refused to form meaning in her mind. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone tampered with his car. I'm saying Marcus Mitchell was murdered." The investigator's voice was heavy. "And Victoria is planning to use that information to destroy you." Grace dropped the phone. Ethan woke up instantly, responding to her distress. "Grace? What's wrong? What happened?" She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Marcus, her husband, the father of her children, murdered. "Grace, talk to me." Ethan was cupping her face now, his eyes wild with concern. "What's going on?" She found her voice somewhere in the wreckage of her heart. "Marcus was killed," she whispered. "Someone murdered him." Ethan went still. "What?" "A private investigator. Victoria hired him. He found evidence that someone tampered with the car." Grace's voice was barely audible. "It wasn't an accident, Ethan. My husband was murdered." Ethan pulled her against his chest and held her while she shattered. At 7:00 a.m. the next morning, Ethan made a call. "I need the best criminal investigator in the country. Cost is not a factor." He listened for a moment. "Yes, today. I'll pay whatever it takes." Grace sat at the kitchen table, hollow-eyed, watching the twins eat their breakfast like it was any other day. It wasn't any other day. Everything she thought she knew about her life had been built on a lie. Marcus hadn't left her. He had been taken. And someone somewhere was responsible. "We're going to find out who did this," Ethan said, sitting down beside her. "I promise you." "Why would anyone want to kill Marcus?" Grace's voice was empty. "He was a software developer. He went to work. He came home. He played with the boys. He wasn't involved in anything dangerous." "Everyone has secrets. Maybe he knew something, saw something." "Marcus told me everything. We didn't keep secrets." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Everyone has secrets, Grace, even from the people they love." The investigation began at 9:15 a.m. The investigator Ethan hired was named Frank Morrison, a former FBI agent with 30 years of experience. He arrived with a briefcase full of questions and a face that gave nothing away. "Tell me about your husband's work," he said, sitting across from Grace in Ethan's study. "He was a software developer. He worked for a company called Tech Haven. They developed security systems for banks." Frank made a note. "Did he ever talk about problems at work, conflicts with colleagues?" "No, he loved his job. He was up for a promotion the month before he died." "Did anything change in the weeks leading up to the accident?" Grace thought back, trying to remember through the haze of grief that had clouded that time. "He was stressed," she said slowly. "Working late more than usual. I thought it was just the promotion pressure." "Did he mention anything specific?" "Once." Grace's brow furrowed. "He said he'd found something strange in the code, something that shouldn't have been there. He was going to report it to his supervisor." Frank leaned forward. "Did he report it?" "I don't know. He died 3 days later." The room went silent. "I'll need access to his personal effects," Frank said finally. "Any computers, phones, documents he might have left behind." "Everything is in storage. After he died, I couldn't bear to look at it." Grace's voice cracked. "I just packed it all away. We need to unpack it now." At 2:33 p.m., they opened the storage unit. Grace hadn't been here since the funeral. The sight of Marcus's belongings, boxed up and forgotten, hit her like a physical blow. "I can't do this," she whispered. Ethan took her hand. "Yes, you can. I'm right here." They found the laptop in the third box. It was password protected, but Frank had tools for that. Within an hour, he had access to everything. "Holy hell," he breathed, scrolling through files. "What is it?" "Your husband found a backdoor in Tech Haven's security system. Someone had embedded malicious code that would allow unauthorized access to the banks they protected." Frank looked up. He documented everything. Names, dates, screenshots. He was building a case. Against who? Frank turned the laptop toward them. Grace saw the name and her blood ran cold. Sterling Industries, Victoria's family company. "No," she breathed. "No, that's not possible. Your husband discovered that Sterling Industries was using Tech Haven systems to steal from banks," Frank said grimly. "Millions of dollars siphoned through fake accounts over several years. He was going to expose them. So they killed him." The words came from Ethan, flat and certain. Frank nodded slowly. "That's what the evidence suggests." Grace couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process the magnitude of what she was hearing. Victoria hadn't just tried to destroy her life. Victoria's family had destroyed everything long before she ever walked into Ethan's mansion. They had killed Marcus. They had left her a widow. They had left her children without a father. And they had almost gotten away with it. "I want them arrested," Grace said, her voice suddenly sharp as glass. "Every single person involved. I want them to pay for what they did." "That's going to take time," Frank said. "We need to verify everything. Build an airtight case. These are powerful people with expensive lawyers." "I don't care how long it takes." Grace stood up, something fierce igniting in her eyes. "They took my husband from me. They took my children's father. They will answer for it." Ethan stood beside her. "Whatever resources you need, you have them. Money, lawyers, security. Whatever it takes." Frank looked at them both for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "Let's bring them down." The weeks that followed were a blur of investigations and interviews and evidence gathering. Grace threw herself into the process with a determination that frightened even her. Every day she woke up with one purpose: justice for Marcus. At 8:47 a.m. on a Friday morning, the arrests began. 3 executives from Sterling Industries were taken into custody. Federal charges were filed. The news exploded across every network. Victoria Sterling, watching from wherever she had hidden herself, had to be terrified. But she wasn't finished yet. At 3:15 p.m. that same afternoon, Grace received a phone call. "Mrs. Mitchell." It was Victoria's voice, stripped of its usual sweetness. "I know what you're doing." "Good. You think you've won. You think taking down my family's company will fix anything." "I think it's a start." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea what you've started. My family has resources you can't imagine. Connections you can't trace. You've poked a hornet's nest. Your family killed my husband." Silence on the other end. Then Victoria spoke again, and her voice was colder than Grace had ever heard it. "Marcus knew what he was getting into. He should have kept his mouth shut. He should have taken the money we offered him." Grace's heart stopped. "What money?" "We offered him $500,000 to delete those files and walk away. Do you know what he said?" Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. "He said no amount of money was worth his integrity. He said he had a family to think about. He said his children would grow up knowing their father did the right thing." Tears streamed down Grace's face. That was Marcus. That was exactly who he was. "So yes," Victoria continued, "we removed the problem. And if you continue on this path, we'll remove you too." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you. Some battles can't be won. Some enemies are too powerful to defeat." Victoria paused. "Walk away, Grace. Take the billionaire's money and disappear. Raise your children somewhere far away from all of this. It's the only way you survive." Grace thought about Marcus, about his integrity, about the legacy he wanted to leave for his sons. "No," she said. "Excuse me. I said no. I won't walk away. I won't disappear. I will spend every dollar, every hour, every breath I have left to make sure your family pays for what they did." Grace's voice was steady now. "Marcus died for doing the right thing. I won't let his death be in vain." "Then you've signed your death warrant." "Maybe, but at least I'll die standing up." Grace paused. "Goodbye, Victoria. I'll see you in court." She hung up. Ethan had been listening from the doorway. "She threatened you," he said quietly. "Yes." "We need to increase security, move to a safe house, protect the children." Grace shook her head. "We're not running. We're not hiding. We're going to finish this." Grace. Marcus didn't run. Marcus didn't hide. He stood up to these people knowing what they might do because it was the right thing. She turned to face Ethan. "I have to be as brave as he was, for myself, for our sons, for everything he believed in." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and took her face in his hands. "Then we finish it together," he said. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, together." Grace kissed him hard and desperate and full of everything she felt. Together. At 11:58 p.m. that night, Grace stood in the nursery watching her sons sleep. Liam had kicked off his blanket again. Noah had his thumb in his mouth, both of them so peaceful, so innocent, so unaware of the war their mother was fighting for them. "Your daddy was a hero," she whispered. "He gave his life to protect people he'd never met. He stood up when everyone told him to sit down." She reached into the crib and pulled Liam's blanket back over him. "I'm going to make sure the world knows what he did. I'm going to make sure you grow up proud to be his sons." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And I'm going to make sure the people who took him from us pay for every day you had to live without him." She felt Ethan's presence behind her, warm and solid and sure. "I love you," he said quietly. Grace turned and walked into his arms. "I know," she whispered. "That's the only reason I'm still standing." They held each other in the darkness while their children slept. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Grace believed they might actually win. The trial began on a Monday morning in March. Grace sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ethan was beside her, his fingers interlaced with hers, his presence the only thing keeping her grounded. Behind them sat Caroline, and beside her, Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Henderson, and half a dozen other staff members from the estate who had come to show their support. Across the aisle, flanked by lawyers in expensive suits, sat Victoria Sterling. Their eyes met. Victoria smiled. Grace didn't look away. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Walsh presiding. The courtroom stood, and the battle for Marcus's legacy officially began. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 47 minutes. They laid out everything. The back door in Tech Haven's security system. The millions stolen from banks across the country. Marcus's discovery of the fraud. The evidence he had compiled. The offer Sterling Industries made to buy his silence. His refusal. And finally the sabotage of his car that ended his life. Grace listened to every word, tears streaming silently down her face. This was her husband they were talking about. Her partner, the father of her children, reduced to evidence and exhibits and a victim ID number, but also elevated, recognized, honored for the hero he truly was. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "what you've just heard is a compelling story, but that's all it is. A story. There is no direct evidence linking my clients to Mr. Mitchell's death. No witnesses, no confession. Only circumstantial evidence and the accusations of a grieving widow who has much to gain from this conviction. Grace's hands clenched into fists. Ethan leaned close. Don't react. That's what they want. She forced herself to breathe. The defense continued. The prosecution wants you to believe that Sterling Industries, a company that has served this community for 3 generations, would commit murder to cover up a crime. But ask yourselves this: where is the proof? Where is the smoking gun? The attorney paused dramatically. It doesn't exist, because my clients are innocent. Grace wanted to scream, but she stayed silent and still waiting for the prosecution to destroy them. The first witness was Frank Morrison. He walked through his investigation step by step, explaining how he had traced the malicious code back to Sterling Industries, how he had found evidence that Marcus had been offered a bribe, how the timing of the car accident aligned perfectly with Marcus's plan to go to the FBI. In your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked, was Marcus Mitchell's death an accident? No. Frank's voice was certain. The brake lines were tampered with in a way that made failure inevitable, but appeared natural. It's a technique used by professionals. This was a planned assassination. The courtroom murmured. Victoria's smile flickered. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Mr. Morrison, you were paid by Mr. Caldwell to conduct this investigation, correct? That's correct. And Mr. Caldwell is currently in a relationship with the victim's widow. Yes. So it's fair to say you had financial motivation to find evidence that supported Mrs. Mitchell's narrative. Frank's jaw tightened. I had motivation to find the truth. That's what I found. But you were paid by someone who wanted a specific outcome. I've been an investigator for 30 years. I don't manufacture evidence. I follow it. Frank leaned forward. And the evidence in this case is overwhelming. Sterling Industries killed Marcus Mitchell. That's not opinion. That's fact. At 2:17 p.m. on the third day of trial, the prosecution called their star witness. Daniel Harrison, the private investigator Victoria had originally hired, walked to the stand with the weight of betrayal on his shoulders. Mr. Harrison, the prosecutor began. You were initially employed by Victoria Sterling, is that correct? Yes, she hired me to dig up information on Grace Mitchell, anything she could use to discredit her. And what did you find? I found the truth about Marcus Mitchell's death. Daniel's voice was steady. When I discovered what really happened, I couldn't stay silent. I went to Mrs. Mitchell and told her everything. Why? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Because I have a daughter. And I couldn't live with myself knowing I helped cover up a father's murder. Victoria's attorney tried to discredit him, called him a disgruntled employee, suggested he had been paid off by Ethan, implied he had fabricated evidence. Daniel didn't waver. I know what I found, he said simply, and I know what's right. The trial's biggest twist came at 10:43 a.m. on day 5. The prosecution called a witness no one expected, Victoria Sterling herself. She had been subpoenaed to testify against her own family's company. Her face was pale as she took the stand, her usual confidence stripped away. Ms. Sterling, the prosecutor said, you were present at a meeting in October of last year where the Marcus Mitchell problem was discussed. Is that correct? Victoria's lawyer objected. My client has Fifth Amendment rights. Your client was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, the prosecutor reminded the court. She is required to answer. The judge nodded. The witness will respond. Victoria looked around the courtroom, at her family's lawyers, at the executives she had grown up calling uncle, at the empire that had raised her and shaped her and was now crumbling around her. Then she looked at Grace. Something passed between them, not understanding, not forgiveness, but recognition. Two women on opposite sides of the same tragedy. Yes, Victoria said finally, I was present. And what was discussed at that meeting? Victoria closed her eyes. They talked about Marcus Mitchell's discovery, about the threat he posed, about how to neutralize him. Neutralize how? They said they would handle it, that it would look like an accident. Victoria's voice broke. I didn't know they meant murder. I swear I didn't know. But you suspected. Silence. Ms. Sterling, did you suspect that your family planned to kill Marcus Mitchell? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Real tears, Grace realized with shock. Not performance. Not manipulation. Genuine human anguish. Yes, Victoria whispered. I suspected. And I said nothing. The courtroom erupted. Grace sat frozen, watching Victoria crumble on the stand, watching the woman who had tormented her for months finally face the consequences of her silence. She should have felt satisfied, vindicated, triumphant. Instead, she felt something unexpected: pity. Victoria Sterling had been raised by monsters. She had been shaped by their values, corrupted by their money, destroyed by their crimes. She was guilty, yes. But she was also a victim. That didn't excuse what she had done, but it explained it. And for Grace, explanation was the first step toward something she never thought she'd find: peace. The verdict came at 3:47 p.m. on day 12. Guilty. All 3 executives. All counts. Conspiracy. Fraud. Murder in the first degree. Grace heard the word and felt nothing at first. Then everything. Joy and grief and relief and rage all crashing together like waves against a shore. Ethan held her while she sobbed. You did it, he whispered. Marcus has justice. We did it, she corrected through her tears. All of us. Behind them, Caroline was crying too. And Mrs. Patterson. And Henderson, who had doubted Grace once and would never doubt her again. The executives were led away in handcuffs. Victoria was escorted out through a side door, her immunity deal sparing her from prison, but not from public disgrace. Their eyes met one final time. Victoria nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Grace nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't friendship, but it was closure. And closure was enough. The nursery wing opened 6 months later. Grace stood at the entrance watching children run through halls that had once been silent, listening to laughter echo off walls that had once known only loneliness. Ethan came up beside her, Liam on his hip, Noah holding his hand. It's beautiful, she said. It's necessary. He shifted Liam to his other arm. No parent should ever have to choose between their job and their children. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You learned it yourself. I learned it because you showed me what real love looks like. Ethan turned to face her. Before you came, this house was a monument to everything I'd lost. Now, it's a celebration of everything I've found. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Marcus would have loved this, she said softly. He always believed in doing the right thing, building things that mattered, leaving the world better than you found it. That's what we're doing. Ethan touched her face. That's what we'll keep doing. In his memory. In his honor. Liam chose that moment to grab a fistful of Ethan's hair and pull. Dada. Ethan winced but smiled. Yes, buddy, I'm right here. Grace watched them together, this man who had become a father to her children, who had fought for them, protected them, loved them like they were his own. I want to ask you something, Ethan said quietly. What? He set Liam down and took both of Grace's hands in his. I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, he admitted, waiting for the right moment. But I've realized there's no perfect moment. There's just this one. Grace's heart began to race. Ethan. I love you. I love Liam and Noah. I love the life we've built and the family we've become. He dropped to one knee. Grace Mitchell, will you marry me? Time stopped. The children played behind them, oblivious to the magnitude of the moment. Staff members paused in doorways, watching with held breath. The whole world seemed to narrow down to this man, this question, this impossible, beautiful second chance at happiness. Grace thought about Marcus, about the love they had shared, about the future they had planned that was stolen from them too soon. And then she thought about Ethan, about the journey they had taken from strangers to partners, about the trials they had survived and the life they had built from the wreckage. Marcus would have wanted this, she realized. He would have wanted her to live, to love, to grab happiness with both hands and hold on tight. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. "Yes," he repeated like he couldn't believe it. "Yes." Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood pulling her into his arms, spinning her around, while the children shrieked with delight, and the staff applauded, and the house that had once been so cold finally truly became a home. The wedding was held in the garden of the estate on a Saturday afternoon in September. It was small, intimate, family and close friends only. Caroline served as Ethan's best man, a choice that raised eyebrows but felt exactly right. Henderson walked Grace down the aisle, having become something of a father figure to her in the months since Marcus's death. The twins served as ring bearers, toddling down the aisle with the rings tied to pillows they immediately tried to eat. Grace wore a simple white dress. No train. No veil. Just elegant simplicity that made Ethan's breath catch when he saw her. "You're beautiful," he said when she reached him. "You're crying," she replied. "I know." He didn't apologize. He didn't wipe the tears away. "I never thought I'd have this. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything." Grace took his hands. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." The ceremony was brief. They had written their own vows, and Grace went first. "Ethan, when I walked into your house, I was broken. I was grieving. I was terrified. I brought my children into your home out of desperation, and I fully expected to be fired before noon." She paused, steadying her voice. "Instead, I found you on the floor, letting my son call you Dada, and I knew in that moment that you were different, that you were special, that you were exactly what we needed." She squeezed his hands. "You taught me that love doesn't have to be earned, that family isn't just blood, that home is wherever the people you love are. You gave me a second chance at happiness when I thought that chance was gone forever." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "I love you," Grace finished. "And I will love you every day for the rest of my life." Ethan took a deep breath. "Grace, before I met you, I thought I knew what strength was. I thought it was building empires and making money and never letting anyone see you vulnerable." He shook his head. "I was wrong. You showed me what real strength looks like. It looks like a mother hiding her children in a storage room because she has no other options. It looks like a widow standing up to the people who destroyed her family. It looks like a woman choosing to love again when she had every reason to close her heart forever." His voice broke, and he didn't try to hide it. "You didn't just change my life. You saved it. You and those two beautiful boys who somehow decided I was worth climbing onto." He glanced at the twins who were currently trying to share one ring between them. "I promise to be the husband you deserve, the father they deserve, the man your first husband would have wanted you to find." Grace couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears flowing freely. "I love you," Ethan said. "Forever, no matter what." The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Ethan kissed Grace with all the passion and tenderness and gratitude that words couldn't capture. The guests cheered. The twins shouted, "Dada" and "Mama" in unison. And Grace Mitchell Caldwell began the next chapter of her life surrounded by everyone she loved. 1 year later, Grace stood in the nursery at 3:00 a.m., rocking a newborn in her arms. Baby Catherine, named for Ethan's mother, had arrived 2 weeks early, impatient to join a family that was already bursting with love. Ethan appeared in the doorway, exhausted but radiant. "Twins are still asleep," he reported. checked twice to make sure Liam wasn't plotting his usual midnight escape. Grace smiled. He's going to be furious when he realizes he has to share us with someone else. He'll adjust. Ethan moved to stand beside her, looking down at their daughter. They all will. We all will. Catherine made a small sound somewhere between a sigh and a coo, and both her parents melted. She has your eyes, Grace said softly. She has your strength. Ethan kissed her forehead. I can already tell. They stood together in the quiet darkness, three souls bound by love and loss, and the miracle of new beginnings. I've been thinking, Grace said. About what? About Marcus. About what he would say if he could see us now. Ethan was quiet, waiting. I think he would say thank you. Grace's voice was thick with emotion. For taking care of us, for loving us, for making sure his sons knew what it felt like to have a father. I'm not trying to replace him. I know. That's why it works. Grace turned to face him. You've never tried to erase Marcus from our lives. You've honored his memory, made space for him. Let the boys know who he was and why he mattered. He was their father. He always will be. And now they have two. Grace touched his face. One who gave them life, and one who chose them. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I didn't choose them, he said quietly. They chose me. That day in the living room when Liam crawled into my lap and called me Dada, he chose me, and I've been trying to be worthy of that choice ever since. You are. Grace kissed him softly. You always have been. The sun rose over the Caldwell estate at 6:47 a.m. Grace stood at the window of the master bedroom, Catherine asleep in the bassinet beside her, watching the light spread across the grounds. So much had changed since that terrifying morning when she'd hidden her twins in a storage room and prayed for survival. She had lost her husband, found love again, uncovered murder, fought for justice, built a family from the ruins of tragedy. And now she was standing in a house that had become her home with a man who had become her partner, surrounded by children who had become her entire world. Ethan appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? Everything. Grace leaned back against him. The day we met, the pocket watch, Victoria, the trial, the wedding, all of it. Any regrets? Not one. She turned in his arms. Every terrible thing that happened led me here. To you. To this life. I wouldn't change a single moment. Even the parts that hurt. Especially those. The hurt taught me what matters. The pain showed me what's real. She touched his face. And you showed me that love can heal anything. Even the wounds we think will never close. Ethan kissed her soft and sure and full of promise. I love you, Grace Caldwell. I love you too, Ethan Caldwell. Behind them, the door burst open. Liam and Noah, now 3 years old and absolutely unstoppable, came charging into the room with the energy of tiny hurricanes. Dada, mama, baby, awake. Catherine had indeed woken up, her newborn cry piercing the morning air. Grace laughed. I guess quiet time is over. Quiet time doesn't exist in this house anymore. Ethan scooped up both boys, one under each arm. And I wouldn't have it any other way. They gathered as a family in the morning light, parents and children, grief and joy, past and present, all woven together into something beautiful and unbreakable. Grace looked around at the faces she loved. Her sons who had given her a reason to keep fighting. Her daughter who represented hope for the future. Her husband who had proven that broken hearts could heal. This was what Marcus had died for. Not just justice, but love. Not just truth, but family. The belief that doing the right thing mattered even when it cost everything. Grace carried that belief forward now, in the nursery wing where no parent would ever have to hide their children. In the foundation she and Ethan had created to help widows and single mothers. in the way she raised her children to be kind and brave and true. Marcus's legacy lived on, not in anger or revenge, but in love. And that love Grace knew now was the most powerful force in the universe. It had carried her through darkness. It had brought her to light. And it would sustain her for the rest of her days. The story that began with a desperate mother hiding her twins in a storage room ended with a woman standing in the home she had built, surrounded by the family she had found stronger than she ever imagined possible. She had been broken. She had been rebuilt. And she would never be alone again. That was the truth Grace Mitchell Caldwell carried with her always. That was the legacy she would leave behind. And that was the ending that Marcus, wherever he was, would have been proud of. Because love wins. It always wins. Even when everything says it shouldn't. Even when the world tries to tear it apart. Love finds a way. And Grace Mitchell Caldwell was living proof.